Welcome, everyone.
I'm hoping Zoom can hear me loud and clear, Caitlin.
I can hear you.
Great. Okay, so thank you all for coming. We're obviously also casting to Zoom, so thank you guys for coming too. I am Jenny Lukaszewicz. I am the Director of Community Engagement and Strategic Partnerships here at Greenwich House. Delighted to welcome you here. Delighted to have Michelle with us as a resident this summer. It's been really fantastic. For a little bit of her background, I'm going to stumble over these words because she is so accomplished. Michelle Eam is a New York City-based ceramic artist. She earned her BA in Biological Sciences and Art from the State University of New York at Buffalo. She first studied here at Greenwich House under Dave Gibson. I was delighted to meet her 12 years ago when she was throwing and painting beautiful underglaze ceramics. Since then, her work was included in the Brooklyn Artists Exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum, featured in the New York Times Exhibition Review. She was the 2024 Artist Fellow at the Museum of Art and Design in New York. Her awards include the Center for Craft Teaching Artist Cohort, the American Craft Council Emerging Artist Cohort, and the Ceramics Monthly Emerging Artist. She has held residencies at the Kohler Art Center, Township 10, Watershed Center for Ceramic Arts as a guest artist, Penland School of Craft as a distinguished fellow, the Archie Bray as a visiting artist. She has exhibited at Nada Art Fair, Demin Gallery, the Clay Studio in Philly. Her work is featured in the New York Times, Art News, Hyperallergic, Impulse, and Ceramics Now. She's represented by Demin Gallery in New York. She was just awarded the Hopper Prize this week, and she'll be featured in the Armory Show at the end of September. She will also be teaching beginning hand building this fall on Monday evenings, Friday mornings, and a special topic class focused on contemporary Maiolica on Wednesday mornings. Sign up at noon on Monday. And without further ado, we're going to mess with the sound a little more, but here is Michelle. Downside here. How do I do that? Hide floating control. Hide floating control. Oh wait, it came back on.
I can hear you.
She can hear me. Okay. Uh, okay, great. Thank you all for coming. My name is Michelle Eam. Again, yeah, I'm based in New York City. I live in Ridgewood. My studio is in Ridgewood, New York. It's kind of at the border of Bushwick and Ridgewood. And I also live at the border of Bushwick and Ridgewood. But I'm really excited to be here as a resident artist. And I'm just kind of going to go through a little bit of my journey here if I can get this to work. Okay. So my journey begins here at, well, really, before Greenwich House Pottery, I should also mention, like when I graduated college in 2008, I came to New York. I went to school studying art and biology, and I've always had this like kind of interest in the sciences and the arts. And I'm just gonna leave that there. So, sorry. Is this gonna keep coming up? Okay. So I was dabbling in painting before I got into ceramics, and I think I was just kind of like searching for a medium that really spoke to me. Painting did not make any sense to me, and I was really struggling to kind of understand painting and find my ground in that. And so I came here as a student in 2013, about 13 years ago, and I just fell in love with this medium. And I think that happens to a lot of people who do ceramics. I was throwing on the wheel and I took classes here with David Gibson for 4 years. And it was a really like, this place is a really important place to me in that I see it as like my first clay home. And I really found like a great community here. This place has been open since 1909. So with that comes a lot of history.
And I think a lot of really amazing people came through, and it's a really diverse community too. So it doesn't feel isolated from the rest of the world. I think there's a part of like academic institution where there's a different style of learning. And I think being outside of the academic institution in a place where that kind of serves as like a technical school really spoke to me. And I think if you look at the history, also, this place started as a settlement house offering classes to immigrants to gain a technical skill and to be employable. And so I think that part of the history really speaks to me as a working artist. And although I have, my work has gone through a lot of iterations. I should just briefly say, like, I had a pottery business. I was the sole owner, and it was a small pottery business where I sold mugs and cups and things like that. But I want to talk about the work where the figurative sculpture begins. And I think I was at this crossroad of like, I really wanted to kind of delve deeper into what it is that I wanted to communicate through sculpture. And I began making these figurative, these heads, these ceramic heads. And these are pieces that I made at Township 10 residency in Western North Carolina in 2024. And these pieces, for me, kind of stems from my interest in Korean ceramics. So when I first started ceramics, like many other ceramic artists that come to this medium, I think there is something about this medium that makes you question about history and the lineage of the objects that you're making. And for me, I was very interested in traditional Korean ceramic tradition. So on the right is an example of a moon jar from 18th century Joseon Dynasty from the National Museum of Korea, and not National Museum of Museum. I need to correct that. But to the left is some of those first wheel thrown pieces inspired by this moon jar. And I think this moon jar really has like the significance to me in that when I started making figurative sculpture, I was thinking, of course, about my own personal history and my upbringing. And to share a little bit about that, I was first born in the US. And then after having been Americanized already, I did a reverse immigration. So when I was about 11 years old, I moved to Korea. And I didn't read, speak, write Korean. So to the left is an image of me at my goodbye party. I lived in a predominantly white suburban neighborhood outside of Boston. And then to the right is when I started school in Korea. And I think this moment in my life really kind of impacted me as an adult, in that I'm always trying to search for how to meld these cultures together. I think experiencing that contrast when I went to Korea came as a huge shock. I'm in this Korean body, but inside, I am essentially American. And wearing this uniform and having to sorry, that's my partner at home. Inky's the name of our dog. So just thinking about like the uniform and like, I had to cut off all my hair, and it was very militaristic. There's corporal punishment. I had never experienced that before. And it was a very restrictive, like strict cultural environment, but also there's a lot of warmth. And I think like the contrast too is like, in America, we celebrate individualism. And in Asia, for most of Asia and Korea, from what I experienced, is collectivism is very much a part of the culture. I went to Korea, all the girls wanted to hold my hands and link arms, and I just couldn't understand why everyone was touching me. And I think now that I reflect back on this image, it's just like, I think this is where my obsession with like uniforms kind of stems from. I wore uniform every day, and I'll talk more about my work, of course. But the uniform has, I depict women in uniforms essentially. This is me in high school in Korea. And I lived there for 5 years. But, going back to this moon jar, I think the moon jar really encapsulates this existence. And I think the moon jar for me is like significant in that it allowed me to kind of think conceptually about my identity, but also it is like where I make this departure from making functional pottery and delving deeper into sculpture or figurative sculpture. So for those of you who are not familiar with historical object, it is traditionally thrown on the wheel separately in two bowls. and then the two halves are then joined together at the rim. And so oftentimes in historical examples, I think they say there's only about 100 from 18th century that still exist. But at the rim where it's joined, there's this mark of imperfection, and there's like this undulation that happens. And this one is not as pronounced, but if you see examples at the Met, there are some where it's really more pronounced. And I think that imperfection is like where I exist between the two halves. And so those ceramic heads that I showed you, this is another example from that series, which I showed at the Brooklyn Museum, is kind of just exploring the moon jar through kind of the figure. And then from there, and then I started exploring this idea about home and like, what does home mean to me? And home is this place that is in constant transition. It is transient. And on one of my flights back here to the US after having visited my family, and I should mention most of my family live in Korea, I was on this flight on Korean Air, and I'm just like mesmerized by these flight attendants, just like every aspect of their uniform and their hair and their smile. It's just like to perfection. And I just had this idea about using the flight attendant avatar to explore this idea of home. So I was in residence at the Museum of Arts and Design in 2024, and this is where I built my very first flight attendant full figure sculpture. This is built to talk a little bit about process. This is built with coils from top to bottom. And this is the finished piece. I titled it Beef or Chicken because they run down the aisles asking you if you like beef or chicken. Now there's a vegetarian option, I think. But yeah, so this is the finished version of her, which I showed at the Clay Studio, part of this exhibition called The Future of Clay. And in this exhibition, I showed her alongside other iterations of moon jars that I was kind of exploring during this residency. The residency was 6 months long. And so you can see other examples of how I was thinking about the moon jar formalistically. And then from there, I kind of, honed in on just the flight attendant. Like I had this opportunity to have my first solo exhibition with Dim & Gallery. And I wanted to have a show of just flight attendants. It's just a singular idea. And so this is the installation of that show, which is titled Hello, Goodbye, just thinking about like opening, closing doors. I think this aircraft for me, it's a strangely like spiritual place where like, I feel like I think about my whole life during this 15-hour journey. And so we kind of installed it as though they're lined up and you're kind of walking down this aisle with them greeting you. And to just give you a sense of scale, they're all about 4 feet tall-ish. I am taller than them. And you can see on the bases, like I had a lot of fun with like looking at surface objects. And I really like this idea of the women standing on those trays and really having presence on top of them. Standing. Again, a little bit about process. So those figures for that show, I built them all with coils. They're coil built, hand built, and the kiln in my studio. I'm pretty limited. It's like a medium-sized kiln, and so, but I can't fire them in one shot. So those were all built modularly, and I'm kind of devising systems to kind of see proportion as I go. And I think this process of like this, I call it fake engineering, but it's like, I loved it. I really enjoyed this process of like the physics of it. And, it really tickles my brain of like the science part of it, of just how things are interlocking with each other. They are essentially built like lidded jars. So kind of like a vessel. And this is the finished version of that. She is holding a model airplane, Chosun. Some more shots of how they're made. So again, they lock into each other like lidded jars again. And so these are all kind of like put in the kiln together. Sorry. Okay, and Sinjung, another piece from that show. Just to mention about the titles, the titles were all given by my mother. My mother it's hard to explain, but the Korean language is really based in Chinese characters. So she gave them Chinese characters, which each of the characters symbolize a meaning. So all the names I realize they have a lot to do with like purity and kind of Confucius beliefs in Asian culture. But one of the figures thinking about how to inject humor into some of the sculptures. So like, this is like that ritual that flight attendants do, which I find really kind of funny and absurd. It's like they're showing you how to tighten your belt at the beginning of the flight. And I just like, I think humor is a really great way to resolve sort of like anxiety and fear. And so this is one of the poses that I did where she's doing that demonstration of how to put a belt on. This is a finished piece of Young-eun. And Young-eun, I think, translates to someone who's intelligent and graceful. This piece, Chuvi Umbi, it's actually named after my nieces. My nieces are not twins. The faces are referencing my own face. But yeah, so it's two girls put together making a heart sign with their hands. And this piece is something that I built while my father was passing away towards the end of his life. And this is a shot from behind of the two girls facing the rest of the flight attendant crew. Kyujin was another piece. So I think like I really want to do a short-haired girl. I feel like the short-haired girls are like kind of more rebellious because they cut their hair off and normally they have it like tight in the bun. So this is another piece that I made in that show. This wasn't a part of the solo exhibition, but it was part of that series. And Jeong-suk is one that I showed. It's actually the first flight attendant that I showed with Jimin at Nara Art Fair last year. And then while I was kind of making this work, I really kind of leaned into the service aspect of the flight attendants. And I really wanted to capture one wearing the apron with the coffee pitcher. So this is Gumbi. And all the flight attendants have this like really iconic hairpin that I wanted to capture too for each of them. And, with this thinking about that service aspect, like a lot of this work, it's like I feel like I'm putting my own body into it. I mean, literally putting my own body into the work, like muscling clay, but also like, I asked my partner would take pictures of me. I would ask him to take pictures of me holding the objects and just trying to see the pose myself and see it within me. So this is just part of the process that I wanted to share. This is Chedi. Chedi means many colors, and that's what my mom gave her that name because she said she looked like she talked a lot. But she's holding a wine bottle, and this wine is the specific bottle of Chateau d'Yquem, which is like a beautiful dessert wine, and I'll talk a little bit more about the wine. But like I wanted to kind of then talk. I think through these pieces, like I realized, just where it's coming from. Like I'm to share. Like I worked as a captain at a Michelin-starred fine dining restaurant for a while. Like I worked in the hospitality industry for 8 years. This is a restaurant actually just down the street. And, that was a huge part of my life. It is how I sustained my studio. I worked night after night in restaurants. And a captain is another word for a head server at a restaurant, but in a fine dining setting. And I reflect on this experience a lot because it is a place where, it is the style of service is very militaristic. It's very regimented. Every little detail counts of like where the glassware is put. The label of the brand, the wine glass must face at 6 o'clock. And it is a place where we performed synchronized service. So I think like through the flight attendants, I'm really kind of reflecting on this experience of performative labor and women's labor in general, but just like how these professional roles exist and what that entails of like, the manual labor that exists within like working class roles is like masked within, these pristine uniforms and the way you wear your hair and the makeup you put on. So this is me holding a Wagyu box that I had to walk around with and show people, and this display of this beef that was extremely expensive. And this is not the same restaurant, but I've really been like thinking about that camaraderie that exists in those workplaces of like the shared camaraderie, the stories that you share with one another, with your coworkers, and the shared struggle of labor. And actually, when I look back early on when I started doing ceramics here at Greenwich House, I did a series of like my life as a service worker, and I just wanted to show you a couple pieces that I made during that time of service work. So that's like 10 years ago. And after the flight attendants, I made some pieces more leaning into the service worker. So this is of a sommelier, a fictitious sommelier, and she's holding this wine bottle. And this is a wine bottle called La Tâche. And in the hospitality industry, I think this has like a huge significance. But it's kind of interesting to think about wine as this like kind of bridge between two very different worlds of like the worker and the patrons. And the La Tâche, there's this like celebration that happens around this bottle when it comes out, and it's like excitement on both parts. And that, this wine that we sell, that I used to sell, would, each bottle is like over $10,000, and like, and I think what it is, it's just like, it's a conversation point between the two halves, it kind of goes back to the moon jar of like, where the two halves meet. And it's like the wine is kind of like, for me, symbolically at the rim, where it's, the celebration point. Just a little bit of a close up. She's standing on a menu. There's nothing on the menu because you don't need it, because all you need is the La Tâche. And, for the worker, it's like the La Tâche, for me, like it signifies like me being able to pay rent in one night. So just to show you a process of her being built. So it's all built with terracotta clay. And the one on the right I want to talk about next. So I started making kind of smaller pieces too. I just wanted to experiment with a smaller size. And not that this woman is any smaller than the sommelier, but another service figure, another figure that I was interested in came from this question of like, this question of like, what does service look like in a totalitarian regime in North Korea? I feel like everyone talks about North Korea as if they know what's going on, but I think none of us really understand what life is like or society is like in North Korea, and such a place that is so hidden and unseen. And I learned about these traffic controllers who are recruited by the government. Oftentimes they're young, like beautiful women who stand in traffic and they direct traffic all day long. And I have learned that because electricity is quite scarce in North Korea, from what I've read, is that because of that, there's not many traffic lights. So they have people directing traffic manually all day long. And if you ever get to see a video of them, it's really kind of, it's this dance. It's like a very mechanistic kind of a dance. And I, thought of them as like, these women are like the light of this country. To give you a little process of how then I started building these figures. And I really like the baton aspect of these girls. So these are both kind of about like 25 inches or something like that. And, in part, my work is inspired by terracotta warriors, of course, like, thinking about the collective and the individual, this grand, body of figures that, it's quite impressive. I've never seen it myself in person. I've always wanted to go, but, I find this just really fascinating that this actually exists. And with that, I made a proposal to go to Kohler residency. I went earlier this year. It's a 3-month residency. For those of you who are not familiar, It is within the Kohler Toilet Factory, the factory where they make sinks and toilets and urinals and things like that. So the residency happens in the factory itself. So you're working alongside factory associates who are manually making and turning toilets. And so I really have this idea of like using that industrial process to make multiples and make my own terracotta army out of what's called vitreous china. It's a type of porcelain slip that you use. And I want to talk a little bit about what I worked on at this residency. So I made 3 models of 3 different female figures, built them before I went to the residency. And knowing that I would be using the mold making process, the casting process to build my figures, I had to kind of think about how to make the molds ahead of time, knowing that I would have to make molds of parts that kind of protruded outside of the body separately. To give you a little glimpse of like that process. So this is how the molds are made. I was paired with a factory associate named Valjean. And Valjean has been working at the factory for about 40 years. And a lot of the guys who work at the factory all kind of seem to have been there for like 34 years. And their father worked there and their grandfather worked there. And it's a really kind of interesting place to think about labor. But this is, so I went there, worked with this master mold maker. And even though I had mold making experience from before, it's a really intense process. First of all, the factory is about like 90, it's kept at 90 degrees. So you're in there kind of like sweating and making these molds. And I learned how to make very complex molds to capture the different details on the body. So on the right, you can kind of see like these loose parts that are held together by pins. And this is like an example of one mold of all the different parts made out of plaster. So during the 3 months, the first month that I spent making molds. The second month was all about kind of testing the casting of it. So this is an image of one of the molds being dumped out. They were quite heavy and large, and so I needed help. I had assistance with the tech, Nicole, to help me with that. And that second month with the slip casting, I really just kind of had to figure out and dial in, like, exactly down to the minute. Like every day we were just testing to see, like, oh, is it collapsing? Is it thick? Are the walls thick enough? Is it standing? And all of these things. And it's a really kind of technical process. So this is one of the first cast flight attendant pieces. And you can kind of see how the sides of the figure is captured in the plaster mold. And this is a collection of all the molds that I made during that residency. All but one I destroyed by choice. I just think of these as like as additions. These are additions, never to be made again. One of the molds was kept in the collection, the study collection at Kohler, which I was really happy about. But I think of these molds as like the architecture, the invisible architecture of the labor, which kind of plays into the ideas that I'm exploring with the service roles of these women. And there's like not many photos that I can share with about inside the factory, because they don't allow you to share a lot of photos from there, but these are a couple that I got approved. And so the figures, they go into this kiln that's like the length of a football field, essentially. And it moves continuously. So it's like once fired. So it kind of moves through bisque and then glaze on one shot and then comes back out finished. And the girls, I just think it's like funny that the girls are like riding in with the toilets and the sinks and these are the finished works. I made a total of 26 figures of 3 different figures. This is all put together. To give you scale, they're all about like 21 inches tall. So one set was of the flight attendants. So I have my flight attendant army. And every single one is hand painted. And so although they are like unique, they're unique additions, but it's like every single eye and eyelash, eyebrow was hand painted. And so if you look very closely, you can't really see it here, but if you look very closely, like the expression, they're all kind of slightly different. Like one is like slightly happier than the other. And it's kind of like funny to see them up close. The close-up shot. Okay. And then that iconic hairpin of flight attendant of Korean Air. The second set was of the North Korean traffic girl. This is probably the most challenging figure that I worked on while I was there because it just had so much detail, like on the uniforms, and like the baton with a separate mold, the hand. Can't really see it in this photo, but she's holding a whistle, a white whistle in her hand, and so all of those smaller pieces had to be joined together after it was casted. And to share a little bit about that process. So this is while it's green. Yeah, and then to the right, it's it being casted. Yeah, and I think with the two pieces, like I keep going back to the moon jar, but it really does stem from there because it's like this is the moon jar to me. It's like the South Korean girl and the North Korean girl together, and I had this like real fantasy of like before I went to the residency, I had this fantasy of installing them together, and I mean I had a lot of fantasies before I went to the factory, but I had this like grandiose idea of like seeing them together and symbolizing harmony. But what was really interesting to me is like when I first got the two together and I put them facing each other, it just I had this like feeling of like, wow, you know, they just don't get each other actually. Like there's a complete disconnect. And it's like, do they hate each other or is just more like confusing? And it was really kind of interesting to see that. And so the project kind of changed after I saw that. To talk about the third figure, that one is of Phyllis Cow. And for those of you who are not familiar, Phyllis Cow is an auctioneer at Sotheby's, and she's known to have sold the most expensive dinosaur fossil in history. And the Stegosaurus that she sold was for $44.6 million, but very recently she sold a T-Rex that I think broke a record, and she famously said, take a bigger bite to the audience while she's like performing. But so like Phyllis Cow for me is like the other end of the extreme of performative labor. And it's kind of interesting because I see her still as working class. You know, this is a woman that is just kind of in very expensive clothing and very specific hair. And she's like this icon in the art world. But it is still labor. It's extremely performative what she does, and it's very mesmerizing to watch. But yeah, so I had this idea of making her, and I chose this outfit that she's wearing. It's a black suit, and I really wanted to capture that hair and this specific gavel that she carries. And I think the suit for me, it's like the back, the drapery, it's all very like beautiful. And so that third figure was of her, and this is like the work in progress at the factory. And this one was like the very first one that I tested and came out of the kiln. I have to say, like just in terms of like ceramics process, like these figures are all casted and then painted with glaze on while it's bone dry, and then sent off to the kiln and fired in one shot. And so these are the finished pieces of Phyllis Cow. I think there's like 12 of them total. I'll be showing these at the Armory Show at the Art Fair at the end of September. The close-up of the gavel. She has a very specific gavel. It doesn't have like the long handle on it. It's like a short gavel. And this is the part of the mold that captures like that drapery on the back of the uniform, or that's, I keep calling it a uniform. It's her outfit, it's her suit. But yeah, so that's kind of like the loose pieces of how I captured the back of it that protruded out, little close up with that. And while I think like while at to Polar Factory was like it had a huge impact on me as an artist. I think for me, because I'm working through this idea about labor and exploring that and exploring my own labor history, I think being in this factory and being in the presence of blue collar workers, I think there's something about that really like hit my heart. And aside from the figures, I had this napkin piece that I was intending for it to just be like a side project. And so I'm holding these cast napkins, service napkins, essentially. And I think while I was casting them, it just turned into a much bigger project, because I think there's something where like you witness every day, like watching these guys, work every day, flipping these like giant molds and making, and they've been doing this for 40 years. And it's like a much stripped down version of manual labor, of like working class labor. And quite literally too, because these guys work there with their shirts off. They barely wear any clothes. It's so hot in there. In the summer, I think it gets to like 100 degrees. But seeing them, I just like, made that connection. And a lot of it just like reminded me of folding napkins night after night. So when I worked in service, part of the side work was part of my responsibilities, like to fold 100 napkins every night, and then like this work is like repetitive. It's mundane. It's like the most boring thing you'll ever do. But I think in folding that napkin is like what happens during those moments is like this shared camaraderie with the people you work with, and you get to know there's like a sense of intimacy with other workers. And this is where conversations like about your aspirations as an artist to come up, or what happened during the night, what did Drew Barrymore say when you went to her table, like just gossip, and like all this stuff like comes out, and you're folding napkins together. And kind of interesting how like all those stories get folded into the napkin, and then on this like white bleached napkin, which is really toxic to your body, but fold it back and then present it back onto a nice white tablecloth table for the patrons to consume once more. And so I ended up making a total of 110 napkins during this residency. And I really wanted to see that repetition to make visible of the work that we do. So I arranged them in stacks. They ended up being editions, and I'm currently showing this piece called The American Club at Mrs. Gallery in Queens, in Maspeth, Queens, in a show called Queens of Queens artists. And The American Club is I'm pulling from the name of the hotel, the 5-star hotel that is situated across from the Kohler factory. So once upon a time, the early 1900s, this place used to be a dormitory. It served as a dormitory for immigrant workers to live in so that they could work in the factory. And there was like this utopian idea of creating this factory town by Mr. Kohler. And then now it's like turned into a 5-star hotel. It's kind of interesting to see like how industry turning into hospitality. And I spent a lot of time in this hotel, and so that's why I wanted to call it that. And I also just kind of spent a lot of time like speaking to the workers in hospitality there. This is another edition. Unfortunately, I can't show you the reference images, but the steel base of it, I'm referencing a structure that is used for molds in the factory. It's hard to kind of describe, but I spent a lot of time in the basement of the factory too. It's a very kind of mysterious, strange place, and there's like all the molds that they have ever poured are like down there in this basement. It's like kind of dark, and then if you go all the way back in, there's this area where they make the mother mold. So it's basically like the molds of the molds that the mother mold makes the molds that go on the floor, then they get casted in. And those mother molds they stand in these like steel rods on top of these like iron rod structures. And it feels very like it kind of like feels like aliens are being born out of there, because like the plaster is like dripping all out. And so I wanted to I was really inspired by that, and I wanted to have that structure holding up the napkins. And this one is titled Labor Without Art is Brutality. And this is coming from a quote that Kohler uses. Kohler, it's really interesting. Like the whole quote is actually by John Ruskin, a philosopher, and life without labor is guilt, labor without art is brutality. And I think it's really interesting that the company uses this quote because it is uh, it is addressing like the brutality of labor in general. Like it acknowledges that there are two sides. There is labor and there is art. And I think just like so yeah, like the brutality of it is what I found. It's just kind of interesting that I think a private company is like using a quote like this. So yeah, so this is like, and if you go into the American Club Hotel and the five-star hotel, they have this quote like this in the stained glass window. And so I wanted to title one set of the napkins after that. And so talk a little bit about what I'm doing here during my residency. So this residency is 2 months long, and I started kind of continuing making molds, and just thought of like a non-figurative object that I can repeat over and over again. And I've landed on this champagne coupe, and I am casting them right now. Nothing's finished, but yeah, so I'm arranging them into, eventually it's going to be like a pyramid, like a champagne tower. And, it's like symbolizing like the hierarchy that we exist in society, and just like this idea of like the trickle down economy. And I'm also working, of course, on a figure, and this is the piece that I'm working on right now. So it's built solid on an armature, and that the picture on the right, that clay structure underneath the pictures, it's not part of the structure of the sculpture, but it's just there to like hold up the pictures. And this is probably the most complicated piece that I've ever really worked on. But so after I build it, then I have to cut it down and hollow it out, and then reattach everything. And so I've just been kind of working on the last few weeks of how to get the pictures back on the arm after I hollow everything out. So yeah, this is kind of like a glimpse into like what that process looks like. And it is, I'm using this reference photo of a friend that I used to work with, and we would run around the restaurant with pictures in our hands like that. And it's like kind of like showmanship, and it's like there's like some athleticism that goes into this kind of work, and it's like kind of funny and absurd, but I wanted to kind of capture that. And so she's holding these 5 pictures that are modeled after those. And again, that structure underneath, like that's not a part of the structure, it is just a firing prop, which I will it's just there to hold it up, and it will be removed later. But yeah, so this is the figure that I'm working on here. And I'll just end with this one. This is Phyllis Cow, much larger, and I finished this here at Greenwich House also. It is in my studio. If you would like to see it in person, you can come, but I'm going to be showing this also at the Armory Show. And this is Phyllis Cow holding a pair of white gloves, which signifies having sold the whole lot in the auction night. So yeah, that's it. Yeah. do you have any questions? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I destroyed all of them but one. Yeah, the company kept one for their study collection, so it's not there for them to use or anything like that. It's just, yeah, for educational purposes. But all the molds were destroyed. But if I were to have kept them, I could potentially cast in them. But the problem is because the figures had so much detail, by the end of casting, like it was already losing a lot of detail. Like I would spend so much time like carving away, like yeah, the scheme lines and stuff like that. No.
Michelle, would you be willing to repeat the questions so people
Hold on.
in the Zoom can understand?
Sorry, Caitlin's asking me to repeat the question. The question was what I'm doing with the molds, right?
Perfect. And if you would be willing to kind of summarize the question before you answer them for the people on Zoom.
Okay. 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 This is to the Zoom, but the question is now, how many can you make? How many can you cast of each mold? So on the floor in the factory, like I'm using the same materials as them. So in the factory, the molds you can cast up to like 80 times until before the mold starts to break down and you're not getting a clean cast. With my molds, I, produced, there were many tests that I had to cast and throw out. So I think each of the figures, let's say I casted maybe 20 times. So a lot less than 80, but I was already losing the details because again, like a lot of the molds they're capturing really small hands and details. And so everything is starting to like wear. But I could have kept them, but I don't have space. Like I live in New York, so and it's like also it was just an idea that it's not a continuous thing. Like I just see them as like it's an addition, and they're not going to be made again. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other questions in the chat? What is the material of this figure? Okay, the question is, what is the material of this figure that we're seeing on the screen? Yeah. Of the molds or the, yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, what is the material used for the molds? Like what kind of clay essentially am I using? It's a slip cast clay or it's a slip casting clay. And it is a clay that is used to cast toilets. And they call it vitreous china, but essentially it's a type of porcelain, but it's extremely durable porcelain. And the reason why that material is used for a plumbing ware factory is because you don't want water going into the structure of your toilets, right? So, so yeah. And it's funny, I didn't mention this, but like, the napkins, I find it personally funny that the napkins are sprayed with like toilet glaze on it, essentially, to serve as napkins. Yes. Hi. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, do I see them as a collective, or do I see the figures in the show as a collective or individual objects or sculptures? And I think they're both. Like they're definitely both. Yeah. Um, well, I mean, it's hard to answer that question because like I haven't shown the Slickcast ones really yet, not as a group, but I haven't like this is a question that I've been like thinking myself because I think there's something in like seeing all of them together, and in the future, I envision doing a much larger like army of them and showing them as a collective. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So the question is about what do I mean about performative labor? So I think it's a very specific kind of labor, and essentially it's all the same labor, right? Like whether you're making toilets or you're serving in a restaurant, um, it's the same kind of labor, really. It's manual labor. But I think in these very specific roles that I'm honing in on, it's like labor where it's packaged into a uniform and you don't see, you're masking the manual labor that is behind the smile and the uniform. You know, it's like you don't see the server folding 100 napkins on the floor. You see the napkins after it's folded and it's already on the table and it's just a given. And so I think the performative labor is what I want to highlight and kind of it's about making something invisible visible. Like the napkins are invisible and I want to make them visible. The women are invisible. We don't pay attention to them. We look at Phyllis Cow, but she's an icon. Like, you know, but we don't look at the servers. So, you know, that's part of like what I mean by like performative labor and in those roles. It's slightly different. It's slightly different from like a true like blue collar work, you know, which I said earlier is like it's stripped down labor. Like it's there, you're seeing it, you're looking at it. And I think like, especially in hospitality and these industries, like that is not something that is profitable for a company to make visible. And so we put people in uniforms to make it look like, you know, so the consumer does not have to witness the labor in front of them. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So the question was, what was the idea behind giving my mom the responsibility of naming the flight attendants? And it just kind of happened organically. Like I would show her pictures and she would just come up with the name. You know, she would like take a look and like, you know, the girl holding the Chateau Cam wine bottle. Immediately she was like, "That's Chetty," and I was like, "Okay." Like what does that name even mean? Because I don't really know Chinese characters. So then I would have to dig deeper and ask her like, okay, what does that name mean? And she's like, oh yeah, she has like many colors. She's like, she talks a lot. Like, you know. And so that it just organically happened. I just thought it would be humorous for her to name all most of the those pieces and give them names. And she had a lot of fun with it too. So you had a question or someone had a question. Yes. Yeah. Mhm. Oh yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Um, so the question was about how things changed while I was at the residency, like how the ideas changed over time. And I think for some of the pieces, it's like it didn't change. Like the Phyllis Co, I had an idea and I just executed it. And the flight attendant too, it's like you know, it didn't really change. But I think what I was explaining earlier, what part of it that did change was like, you know, initially I had this grand idea of like, I really want to see like I think it's just coming from this desire of wanting to see North and South Korea together. And, you know, there's a political element to it. And so I wanted to see the two in the army together, you know, and I like wanted to will it to happen, but it changed. The idea changed because I saw them together and they did not like each other. And and that's what happened. And that's something that really surprised me during that residency. Another change was like the napkins. I really did not have any sort of like, it wasn't a very significant project to me, but it became more significant because I was there and I was like with those guys and just feeling like all these emotions about like the concept of labor and like the 8 years that I spent toiling in a restaurant, like um folding napkins. I fold thousands of napkins and it's like where did all that labor go, you know? And so I think like seeing that and seeing the parallels of that, you know, in the factory and in that environment just like kind of changed it really developed that idea further. And that was something that was very special to me, I think. Yeah. Yeah. No, no. Yeah. Yeah. Like, let me go to a previous photo. So I am building things a little bit differently than when I built the flight attendants, and maybe I'll go back to that after this. But right now, I'm building these solid. So that's solid clay. It's not hollow. So in clay world, you can't really fire things thicker than, let's say, 2 inches. And so you need an empty vessel essentially. And so, but for these pieces right now, in order for me to see proportions, um, building it solid on an armature made more sense. So I can see the whole piece all in one shot while I'm building it, not really having to consider the construction method of the coiling as I'm building it. So, and then from here, what I do is after I built it, I cut it down. And when I'm cutting it down, I'm really cutting it intentionally in areas where I can hide the seam lines. And so the uniform plays a part in that. Like if she's wearing a skirt, I can make the legs fit into the skirt and you won't see the seam lines anymore. And I think like an earlier example would be better to show you, but because like, let me just go back and show you. Sorry. But they lock into each other. And there's a photo way earlier. Oh my God, we're going through the whole art top again. um, yeah, yeah. So for the flight attendant theory that's coming up, just hang on a second. The flight attendant theory. I know that there's a better way to do this, but God, oh no, it's coming up, it's coming up. But you're right in that like the architecture of it, of like the engineering that kind of goes into it is like it's so much part of the right. That's the thing about ceramic is like it's such an arduous process. Like, and you don't see any of this when it's done. And it's so much of this of like figuring it out and like muscling the clay. It's extremely physical. Like I'm taking these things that I can barely carry and I'm sticking it into a barrel, and then I'm cutting it off at the head. Like, and so you can kind of see the structure here. This is a better illustration of like a better picture of like how they lock in together. So like I'm creating structures within the body so that it holds, for example, the neck or something like that. So yeah, like it's a lot of like forward and then backwards thinking and then moving forward again. And now that I'm doing like solid method, I'm cutting it down that way. It's a little bit different process than this. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, this is like making a lidded jar.
It's funny, like I teach beginner hand building here, and I always do the lidded jar demo, and I try to explain like this technique can be applied to a lot of different forms. But yeah. So the question was for the solid pieces, I'm just molding the clay, and the answer is yes. So it's weird. Like time is weird in the ceramics process. Like, you think you're going faster by doing a different process, but you're not because it slows everything else down. So it's like when I'm building coil method with these pieces, uh, like it's slower than building it solid because with solid, I'm just like packing the clay in and like pushing it in from the outside. You're only focusing on the outer shell. Whereas like when you're coiling, you have to consider the inside and the outside while you're building it, which takes a little bit more focus or, the shapes come out a little bit differently when you're coil building as opposed to solid method. But then of course the solid method, even though you're getting it done faster, then now you got to cut it back down, hollow it, and then pay attention to the inside and then join it back together. And hopefully everything aligns again. Yeah. I don't know. I have no idea. Yeah, yeah, no. I mean, yeah. Yeah. I have no I don't know her. Like I don't know her personally. Yeah, yeah. I'm just really showing her. I'm showing a large Phyllis cow and then small Phyllis cows. Which is kind of funny, yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. Online question. I don't know my reading glasses. You spoke of the camaraderie of restaurant workers being special. Slightly off topic question. Is Anthony Bourdain an influence? Anthony Bourdain is not a direct influence, but I think he's a very important character in the restaurant world and just pop culture. I think he's someone who is like very in tune with class and labor, while also being part of this giant mega entertainment industry. So yeah, I think yeah, Anthony Bourdain rocks, but he's not like a direct influence. And then hi, how are you adding color to these? I see that some are acrylic paint and epoxy. That is for sure. So, um, going back to materials, like these are built with terracotta, and the terracotta is then I apply Maiolica. I do Maiolica, what's called Maiolica technique. I take basically an opaque white glaze, and then I paint pigments on top. And how to really explain in a short way, but yeah, so I'm doing that, but then also like I'm using underglazes, and I really like seeing gloss and matte side by next to each other. So I'm just while I'm building and I'm trying to think about, okay, what areas do I want glossy? What areas do I want matte? And the matte areas are like just done with underglazes, but I've also been kind of I've been doing more like using acrylic and epoxy. I don't know why it's like as a ceramics person, you just get so locked into like the ceramics process and you're like, everything needs to be ceramic, but actually it doesn't need to be when you're making sculpture. And so some of these pieces, like, yeah, I want that matte finish. So, the white glove that Phyllis Cow is holding at the end, that's painted after it's glaze fired, and then I paint a white acrylic paint on top, and it works great. And I don't have to fire it. Yeah. This is a combination. Yeah, there's Maiolica there, and yeah, I mean those legs are done with Maiolica. You see that's a good example of Maiolica. Her face, like that's all done with Maiolica with painting on top, and you know Maiolica. I love Maiolica. I'm gonna be teaching Maiolica here, just letting you know. Um, how did it feel to be sharing an art/labor process in a male-dominated, very non-performative space at Kohler? Do any particular insights or conversations come to mind? I am so struck by the relationship between process and outcome you described there and how it relates back to the themes of your work. So that's an interesting question. I think we live in a very polarized world. And I think that there is a perception of blue collar male dominated workspace. And sure, there are stereotypes. These guys were very sexist. But it just doesn't take away from, the power of their labor and their presence and their humanity. And for me, and that's more important than any of the other stuff. And I think that, I think for me, being there, like, making personal relationships with each of those men was very important to me. Um, because of that shared labor struggle. And that's the point where you can make a connection with these men. And, you know, even though sometimes things were a little weird, conversations are kind of weird, you know, people have different politics. And, you know, we have this idea about blue collar men having, you know, MAGA heads or whatever. Like, all of that does exist. But I think at the end of the day, for me, it's like, it is important for me to make that connection and to be able to see the same ground that we are on. It got really intense. Any other questions? So the question was about the heat. Yeah, it's very, very hot in there. It's when I was there in the winter in February to May, and it was about 90 degrees and kept at 80% humidity. And that's on purpose. So the wares don't dry out fast. And so it just dries very evenly and very slowly. And then we're just turning into raisins. I don't know, like, oh yeah, but you gotta think though, like, this place is like massive. The kiln is just one part of this whole factory, and the kiln is just in this other side. And yeah, the kiln itself, it spans the length of a football field. And then I was in this other area, but you're not even in the kiln room at that point. Like, yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. So the question was, how was my experience working in the restaurant industry and then moving into ceramics? And for me, I think they both existed at the same time. Like, I worked on the street, and then I came here to Greenwich House Pottery, and all I did was work. So I would work at night, make pottery, and I just see the two like just inseparable. It's like, it is how I made money. It's how I sustained my studio practices. How I explored all the different ideas that I wanted to explore in through this medium. And so, but when I left, over like professionally left, that happened right when the pandemic hit. I think I was already very burnt out. But yeah, so the pandemic hit, and that was an opportunity for me to make a clean cut and just to really focus on, okay, so what am I doing now? I've always wanted to just focus on ceramics. How do I do it? And that's kind of like where that started. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. So the question is, how do I see, like, I specifically hone in on like women, female figures, and how does this evolve into something else? And that is the question I have every day about, like, you know, where is this going? But, you know, like, we were talking about how that change occurred and it was unexpected at the Kohler residency. I think those are moments that you can't really plan for, you know, and I think like that's where the inspiration comes in. I think for me, it's just like, just being in tune with what it is, the ideas that are important to me. And then also just like, okay, trying to see, like, I'm always doing research about like, oh, like, you know, reading this book about pink collar workers, which is like a term that's new to me, like pink collar, like never heard of this before. And it's a term that got coined in the 60s. And, you know, it's just, I think like reading and just imagining like, how does this translate into sculpture? How does this fit in with everything else? And yeah, like I can't really say like, oh, I can envision exactly where it's going, because sometimes I have that vision. It's like this moment of grandeur, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to Kohler and I'm gonna do this thing. And but it changes. Like the idea changes as you're changing too. And you know, and I do want to start depicting women not just Asian women, but I'm just trying to see like, okay, like what is this, what is that figure? What does that represent to me? A non-Asian figure, how does that really, how do I relate to that person? Or the male figure, how do I present that? And you know, so it's like it's evolving, and it is, your question is the question I have of like, okay, I don't know. Yeah. Hmm. Any other questions? We're good. Well, I thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate this. Yeah, if you want to see my work and Zoom, you're welcome to come. It's a very tight space, so just yeah, don't all come at once, maybe.
Thank you. I can shoot this.